Everybody who's spoken so far, including the people who spoke last night, have made my job a lot easier because you're going to hear me pick up on some things that, that other people have already talked about. Before I get into this, I'd like to know a little bit about you guys. A lot of you know me, a lot of you don't. So who here had a business education? Finance, accounting, marketing, anything, MBA? All right, that's a pretty good number. All right, hands down. Who here had an arts education? Film, cinema, theater? Oh, that's pretty good, about the same. Who here had both? Very few, but some. Okay. All right, well, we're all in the same room, so I know you all kind of know this, but the bad news is we're all in the same business now. I'm a theater major. I have to learn web metrics and read spreadsheets and all that stuff. And if you come from a business background and you're a marketer, you now have to learn to think like a storyteller. So that is probably uncomfortable for a lot of us because we chose the path we chose because we thought it would make us happy. And here we are having to do the thing we chose not to do. That's okay. Now, there's something about the branded content space that, as I've researched it and I've been working in it, that is a little weird. And that is that there's no agreement on very basic terms. And I mean terms like engagement and content. So I'm going to define the word content for the purposes of my presentation. And that is, content is something that the audience chooses to consume because they want an enjoyable experience. In a nutshell, it is something that aims to make people happy they watched it or saw it. And if you think about what that means, what I'm describing is entertainment, okay? Traditional advertising was not entertainment because it was interrupting the entertainment. You had to stop the show you sought out to sit through the commercial. The magazine had a page in between articles with an ad in it. And now we're in a different space. Now the content we are creating is the thing that people want to seek out. Now I realize not everybody defines content that way, but that's how I'm going to define it. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about here. Now, I realize that once you're in the entertainment space, that is deeply uncomfortable for people from the business world because entertainment is a high wire act. It is execution dependent. It is unpredictable. And I realize if you're in this room, chances are you cannot faceplant in front of a client, your content cannot faceplant, or you could lose your job or your client. So what I'm hoping to do in this presentation is give you some tips that will help make that process smoother, help reduce some risk. We're going to start with some things that come before ideation. We're going to get into ideation itself, hammering out a great story. We're going to look at setting KPIs for that story, and I'll finish with a couple of short case studies from Variety. I'm going to brag a little about something I did, and then from one from Rimmel London that they did with Refinery 29. Okay, so here's a thing about stories. There's no foolproof method for hammering out a great story. Even Shakespeare had flops. Romeo and Juliet was a flop. How many bet you didn't know that? It was a famous flop at the time. But I'm a great believer in craft. Someone mentioned craft earlier. Craft, I think that storytelling is about 80% craft and about 20% talent and inspiration, and most people can learn craft. And speaking of Shakespeare, by the way, so the word playwright is spelled P-L-A-Y-W-R-I-G-H-T. And a write, W-R-I-G-H-T, is a maker or a builder. And I think this is a really important concept. Stories aren't written, they're hammered out, they're crafted. And you're building something that's solid and will stand up against headwinds and give you some shelter from the elements. So I think that's really, really important. Okay, so the first thing you have to do before you even begin to hammer out a story is you have to know your brand at a really deep level. You have to know your product. What does your company stand for? What is its mission? What is it in business to do? People discuss this as finding your authentic voice or your brand DNA or your brand ethos. Any of those terms will work. And this is very important today because brands now are public figures. And like artists, people are increasingly having difficulty separating the artist from the art. It's what Shabnam and Soul Pancake were talking about, that if you do not stand for something, people are not interested in you. And if you stand for something that's negative, they're going to reject you. Shabnam talked about the possibility of embracing social good. I think that you don't have to necessarily embrace social good, but you have to stand for something, because young consumers in particular at the top of the funnel are researching brands and they're using their purchase decisions to express their values. So if your company's ethos is in conflict with the content, people will reject the content and reject the message. On the other hand, if the content and the brand voice are in harmony, they each amplify the other. Okay, so your first steps in finding your company's voice are fact-finding. It's things like, who founded the company? Why did they found it? Does it have a mission? A mission is a great thing. Some companies have an explicit mission, some have an implicit mission. Merrill Lynch, the brokerage firm, founded after World War II to make investment safe for the middle class. And remember, after World War II, investing was still considered risky because the last big experience with it was the Great Depression. So Lyft, for example, has a mission of making people's lives better through transportation. These are great missions, but is your company living up to its mission? Merrill Lynch had a problem relatively recently where they had abandoned their core innovation, which was their brokers didn't get commissions, so there was no incentive for them to make trades for their own benefit. They'd abandoned that, and they had a churning scandal where it turns out that's exactly what was going on. Brokers were making trades just to make their own commission. So that could come up in your fact finding. You might find that your brand isn't living up to its mission or it's got real problems. Don't shy away from that. That's okay. Jot it down, put it on your list, and move on. Now, who makes your product and where is it made? That is a good one for some brands. It's not good for everybody. It's really good for Saddleback leather, if you know Saddleback leather. It's not so good for Nike and for Apple, who are probably not going to be showing the factory floor in their advertising. And let's not forget about your existing brand guidelines. What are your logos? What are your fonts? What are your colors? But don't just put those on your list. Let's examine that. You have to look, why those fonts? Why those colors? Why those logos? What are they meant to convey? And are they working? Now, the really fun part is where you go beyond fact-finding and you get into things that are associative and emotional and sort of right brain. This is one I got from the Brand Storytelling Conference in 2018. What does your brand sound like? I had that conversation with our CMO, and it was very short, and I decided we're not going to have that conversation anymore. We don't see it the same way at all. But that was interesting. If your brand were a space, what kind of music would be playing there? We always at Variety think it's going to be hooray for Hollywood. That may not be good, but that's what we think it might be. If it had a voice, what gender would your brand's voice be? And this one I really like. What movie or TV show do you wish your brand had been associated with? That can be a really good one because it can tell you what kind of content you want to be making. If you are part of a content studio like Variety Content Studio and like Courageous, that was up here before, and you are associated with a publisher or a news organization, you have to know your own brand voice as well as your client's brand voice, because you need to bring them together to make content that's going to feel credible on your platform. You don't want to have something on the platform that feels like it just doesn't belong there, but it still has to carry the brand's ethos. And I'll tell you another company that's not here, I think, that's really good at this is Slate Studios. If you look at Slate, when they put branded content on their site, it always feels like it belongs on Slate, even though it's branded. All right, so once you get your authentic voice, that tells you what influencers you can be aligned with, because it'll tell you who fits your brand. It'll tell you what causes you can be aligned with, because it tells you what's going to feel real and not phony. And it'll give you tone and style. And by the way, in the course of discovering your brand voice, you might discover you don't like what you found. That is okay, because this is your moment to change what your brand is about. You can say, I don't like this. I don't like who we are. I don't like what we're doing. So you can make that commitment to be different going forward. You have to own what you've been and make that commitment publicly, but you have to stick with it. Again, as in the Soul Pancake presentation, you cannot do that in a 3-month window. It's got to be a long-term commitment, and you've got to really stick with it. Or again, you'll get blowback from the public, which will find you hypocritical and phony. All right, so now we're ready to start actually thinking about stories, because you've got your brand voice, you know who you are, you know what you represent. So who are you trying to reach? You really need to start with the audience that you're trying to get to. Are you trying to reach soccer fans? Are you trying to reach moms who drive more than 20 miles a day? Are you trying to reach women who are traveling internationally on vacations? And what you're going to do is you're going to target that audience and follow them to the platforms where they consume content, okay? Now, I'm going to make a plea here as someone who works in a content studio. If you are a brand or you're an agency and you're sending out RFPs, please do not send RFPs that define the audience as consumers or women, you know, because that doesn't tell you anything really. And in fact, if you are in a content studio and you get that kind of an RFP and you get that kind of audience definition, you're going to have to go back to the brand and say, you need to give me more information. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to target your audience. And consumers is simply too broad a definition to be much use to us. Now, for me as a content creator, this has profound implications. My background was originally theater. I was in entertainment. I've been in journalism for 20 years. I've covered technology. I've covered business. Well, in journalism, you can say, oh, that's a great story. Let's publish that story. That's fantastic. Let's put that on page 1. In branded content, there's no generic definition of a good story. There is only a story that is good for this audience on this platform. And what's good on this audience and this platform may be bad for that audience and that platform. Andy Siegel, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the right content for the right audience. I'm talking about the ideal macaroni and cheese recipe. There you go. So this is a thing that if you miss that, you know, you really don't have enough to work with. And what this means is that what's good on one platform isn't good on another. A beautiful 16:9 video that's lusciously edited and absolutely gorgeous isn't going to work on Snap or Instagram. A 1:1 video that's good on Snap and Instagram may not work on Facebook. It certainly isn't going to work on CNN. So you may have to have multiple versions of your content depending on the platforms that you are going to. Now, storytelling essentials. Now, when you actually go to bang out a story, to construct your story, certain things are kind of always true. Yes, storytelling has changed because of these new media, because of these new platforms, but certain things about storytelling have proved to be pretty eternal. One of the first things I've got up there is compelling themes, but it's what a screenwriter I know calls the existential problem, as in, why does this story exist? Why am I watching this story? And admit it, you have had videos, you've gone in to watch this thing and you were 30 seconds or a minute in and you were going like, why am I watching this? And you've clicked away. So in this media environment, you not only need to have an answer to that question, you will probably need to answer that question in about the first few seconds. So you need to be very clear on why your audience wants to see this content. Once you've got that, you start going into sort of a checklist. Simple, clear conflict. A conflict doesn't mean having a villain. It means having a struggle or an obstacle to be overcome. Is there a problem that people are trying to solve? Now, in an influencer campaign, you would not necessarily expect to have much of a conflict, but you would hope that the influencer is solving a real problem with the product. And that's all it takes. Then you're in the door. You've got a conflict. Here I am. I've got this problem. I've got this thing. It solved my problem. Done. Relatable characters. In the screenwriting world, people debate relatable or likable. Likable used to be the thing. Now it's more relatable. And what that means is you can make stories about people who are difficult, people who are not easy to like. But you have to do something in your story to get the audience on their side. The classic example is the Western outlaw who's really violent and vicious, but when he gets into town, he makes sure to feed and wipe down his horse before he goes and gets himself a drink. He does something nice for an animal. So that making a character relatable gets you in the door for that. The audience will empathize with them. A journey for the protagonist, that's also called an arc, and that means do they change over the story, and how do they change? What makes them change? Do they suffer along the way? And the bigger your story, which is to say a feature-length documentary or a TV series, the longer it is, the more powerful your conflict needs to be, and the bigger your arc for your character. You would not expect in a 30-second Instagram post to have a life-changing moment for your influencer. But wouldn't it be awesome if you could find that? If you happened to get something that gave them a great experience and really made a difference for them in your 30 seconds? So it's still a goal. A beginning, a middle, and an end is a little bit out of fashion these days because we're all used to these something like the Marvel universe where it never really ends. It's always going on to the next thing. Or like TV shows that are meant to run forever. But there's something very satisfying about a story that is over when you get to the end of it. So I still recommend that one. Now, I talk about a bottom. A bottom can mean a couple of different things. It can mean really, really high stakes for your characters, and it can mean feelings of sadness to balance the highs and the joys and the excitement in your story. 5B, which we talked about earlier, boy, there's a show that's got deep, deep, powerful life and death stakes. It clearly has a bottom. But let's take Uncle Drew, which started out as a series of Pepsi Max videos, right? So that's a pretty lighthearted film. It's mostly a comedy. But even in that, they're trying to have a bottom. The main character has lost his girlfriend, has lost his money, and he's really trying to get his wife back by having these old men win this basketball game for him. So there's a show with a bottom. The Red Bull Stratus jump. You remember that? Where he set the record for highest skydiving jump? He could have been killed, Felix Baumgartner, the skydiver. And in fact, he nearly was. That jump did not go entirely smoothly. And the Human Limit series from Uproxx and Coors Light, in every single video on that, they're exploring something where people are struggling with profound challenges, with brain injuries, with pushing the limits of human endurance. So every one of those has a conflict and a bottom. There's novelty in branded content. Novelty means really having either a new way of presenting your content or a subject that people haven't seen before. 3D, I'm a 3D maven. I could go on and on about it. About every 20 years, it comes back as a novelty. People get excited about it. It tends to go away after that once people are used to it. Right now, virtual reality is a novelty. It's really hot. It's still definitely at the novelty phase. Augmented reality is a novelty. Now, I think that's part of why Pokemon Go was such a hit. And people hadn't seen it before. They weren't used to this idea of seeing a Pokemon in front of their house or at their office. The problem with novelty as a storytelling element is that it has a shelf life. Novelty wears off. So you have to be careful when you're planning your content if you're relying on novelty very much to get it in before the novelty of that particular format is over. And then there's also this concept of surprise. Surprise is a little different. Surprise has to do with not being able to know where the story is going. And that's hard, because we've all seen thousands and thousands of stories. Even little kids have seen so many stories. They're like, I know where this is going. Oh, I know what's going to happen. So it's really, really good if you can get something that people are surprised by. And here's a branded movie that had tons of surprise, the Lego Movie, right? You could never figure out where that movie was going. Phil Lord and Chris Miller just took that in all kinds of unexpected directions. And then you get to the end of it, and you get the live action stuff with Will Ferrell as the dad and his son disagreeing about creativity and how to use the Legos and what this should all be like. And that gives you a bottom and a conflict that wasn't there before. So I think that movie is actually a really, really good example of a lot of these things. Comedy can also give you great brand lift as long as the comedy is in the right tone and style for your brand. All right, so here's an example of comedy that gave great brand lift without the brand even buying it. So y'all know the Matthew McConaughey Lincoln SUV commercials. You know, he's driving down the road, and there's this bull. He's going to think about the bull. Well, Saturday Night Live and Broadway Video did a spoof of those spots, and they posted those spoofs on YouTube, and they went viral. So sales were soft for Lincoln SUVs, and then NBC was worried, you know, have we damaged our relationship with our client because we do a lot of business with Lincoln? But it turned out that sales for Lincoln SUVs went up 25% in the month following those videos going viral. Lincoln got a boost out of it and didn't even pay for that boost. So there's an example of how laughter can be a way that you can satisfy an audience. All right, 2 things that aren't on my list. I'm going to go over them real quick, but they are important things that you can draw on. One is real people. Real people give you a sense of authenticity that actors can't always give you. So sponsored documentaries are a thing right now. They're hot. And the documentary form is more popular than it's ever been, so you know you can get a wide reach with that form. However, the thing that you have to do if you're making a sponsored documentary is you have to make a real documentary. And that means you may have to make your brand promotion considerations secondary, because if people even sniff out that you are trying to do too much brand integration, force your brand in, or warping the truth to promote your brand, they will reject it, and then your documentary is basically worthless. The documentary you mentioned with the chorus touring the South, you know, as you said, only the briefest mention that it's Airbnb. And by the way, in that little teaser, you saw them on the phone with a guy threatening them. That gives you a bottom, doesn't it? You know? So, and here's one more thing. This is very hard, but every artist will support it, and that is experiment. Take some chances. If you're always playing it safe in your branded content, it will end up being boring. And if it's boring, it's not entertaining, and none of your brand messages will get through if it's boring. And that means you're going to not always succeed. If you're taking chances, there are going to be mistakes. One executive I talked to said she defines failure as failing to learn from your mistakes. So I would say if you make mistakes, it's okay. Move on and learn from what you did wrong. Okay, so you have your authentic voice, you have an audience, you have your platform, you have an emotional story that fits the audience and the platform. You're getting ready to plan out your production schedule and the media plan and really get this thing rolling. Sorry, my clicker is not working here. There we go. All you need are specific goals and KPIs, and that's easy, right? Everybody's laughing, yes. I find this a very perilous part of the ideation process, and that's because once you set KPIs, people will try to hit them, right? That's what they're for. That's their purpose. And the KPIs will guide 1,000 creative and business decisions along the way. But your real goals for your content often don't line up with what you can readily measure online. Let me explain that. So you're trying to get back to first principles, you're trying to make something the audience is going to enjoy. You're trying to attract an audience and entertain them and satisfy them. At some level, you are trying to make people happy. And making people happy is a fantastic form of brand engagement. We would all love that. If people are associating those positive feelings with your brand and with your product, that's great. But how do you set a KPI around viewer happiness or satisfaction? There are things that digital platforms can track, and some of them correlate with enjoyment more or less, but I think those correlations are sort of tenuous. If your goal is to make something that evokes positive emotions in people, then you have to look for KPIs that track emotion, and you can't judge that success directly through normal digital metrics. Views and impressions really don't tell you how much the content stuck with people or moved them. I think of that as like trying to gauge the shape of human hands by watching shadow puppets. There's information there. You can sort of figure it out, but it's really hard and it can be misleading. Now, there is a digital metric called engagement. It's not the same as the kind of engagement you're trying to get with your content. Digital engagement measures things like time spent on page and completion rate for videos, scroll depth. If your goal was to evoke emotion, those are indirect measurements. Again, those are your shadow puppets. So when I like to think about setting KPIs, I'm trying to look for things that really go closer to the underlying goals for the content. You've got to balance that with what is readily and easily measurable. So this is a graph of some of the effective parts of branded content over the years. If you look at what's on this list, some of these are readily measurable and some of them aren't. I think the first thing you do is you look for a metric that tells you if you reached your target audience. Now at Variety, we do for your consideration content for people who are doing Oscar or Emmy campaigns. And if they hit their target audience of awards voters, that has been successful. If it gets 100 million views and goes viral, that may not make any difference to them at all. Do they even care? I mean, they might if it helps boost box office. So you have to be clear on what does a mass reach mean to you? Do you even want that? Comments are great for telling you whether people responded positively to the content. If you are using views, impressions, and things like that, be clear on what they mean to you. What is their value to you? And if you're really trying to gauge emotion, you may need to go to surveys. Surveys are cheaper, faster, and easier to do than ever, but they do cost something, they do take some time, and they do take some budget and effort. All right, now I'm going to go to my first case study. And this is for a project that Variety did with Easter seals. We're really proud of it. I promise I'm not going to turn this into a big pitch campaign for Variety. I just happen to oversee this project, so I know it really well. And we're really proud of it. It won a Press Board Award for one of the top branded projects of 2018. So I don't know if you know Easter Seals. A lot of younger people don't. It's a 100-year-old charity benefiting the disability community. They were very clear on who they were and what they wanted to achieve when this started. They were very positive and enthusiastic people, very upbeat. Which was a little bit interesting because you would expect the disability community to be sort of grim. Not at all. They were very, very positive people. And they were walking the walk. They were about service and inclusion and representation. So even though they didn't have a brand playbook or anything to hand us, they were able to express what they were about very clearly so we could understand it. They were trying to reinvigorate an old brand. This was a brand that went back to like Lucille Ball in the old days in Hollywood. They wanted to feel young and fresh and energetic. They came to Variety because they wanted our audience of entertainment thought leaders and decision makers to increase representation and inclusion, both in the content and in business models. So that worked really well for them. Their goals were long-term. Again, not a quarterly goal. They were not looking to get like a 3-month bump in donations. One of the things they wanted was a magazine that they could reprint and distribute at events. So we were doing a standalone magazine that was going to be delivered with Variety. They had a call to action that they wanted to get out to that audience. And we included their brand colors in the content. Their brand colors are yellow, navy blue, and orange. And that was very colorful, almost circus-like. It was so positive. And that provided some surprise, right? Because you wouldn't expect something about the disability community to be sort of that energetic. We created a microsite to house the content. The microsite is still online. You can find it at variety.com/disability. The content itself was very much like Variety. We did a serious entertainment business coverage. We kept the same tone as we would in regular Variety editorial, while carefully observing the FTC rules about deceptive advertising. So the typography, the design, and the visual elements were distinctly different. Because it was a standalone magazine, we had to do a cover. And we booked Millicent Simmons, the young actress from A Quiet Place. And I will take some credit for something. I had this weird idea of like, let's pour flower petals over her. And I thought about it, I'm like, that doesn't mean anything, David. Why do you want to do that? And I just said, I don't know, feels right. And so at our photo shoot, God bless her, she totally got it. And we did that, and she totally sold it. So what we got is this book that was about the disability community, and you'd never seen a supplement that was entirely about that group before. So that gave us surprise and novelty. It was upbeat, that also gave us surprise. And it had a bottom because these people are really struggling with serious issues. It's been a great success for them and for us, and we're continuing to work with them. So that's been a positive project. And of course, we got to do some social good, and we love that. Now, I want to show this Rimmel London video. It's 2 minutes, and I'll be back afterwards to wrap things up. See how many of the things I talked about you can spot.
It's easy to think outside the box when you don't draw one. We were born to be real, not to be perfect. You can try and define me, but I don't buy into labels. I mix and blend from the world around me. My makeup isn't about confidence, it's how I experiment. My makeup isn't about transformation, I own who I am. My makeup is my art, my makeup is my edge, my makeup is me.
In America, the stereotypical beauty icon is white with blonde hair and blue eyes. In 2018, Rimmel smashed that outdated construct. We identified our highest volume of customers as women of color, and we knew that they weren't seeing a version of themselves in all their beauty on screen, online, or even in store. We needed to tell them that not only do we have the products to meet their needs, we had their backs. So we began by paying homage to their source of inspiration, the world around them. Rimmel's Street Beauty was born. With Refinery 29, we created the content series Beauty on My Block, developing fresh looks inspired by authentic trends in diverse communities. A network of multicultural influencers recreated and amplified the looks. We seeded exclusive content across Rimmel's owned and social channels. Most importantly, it was shoppable across every channel. It was the brand's most effective and efficient media play. The program drove the highest net revenue ROI of all media programs in 2018 in all key categories. It drove the highest incremental volume for the brand. We drove affinity and consideration in one powerful program that brought to life a new tagline, Edge Your Look, making Rimmel even more relevant to their biggest fans. The mold has been broken for the brand, for beauty, for her. Edge Your Look, Rimmel London.
Okay, so let's go through this really quickly. Their brand voice. It's easy to think outside the box when you don't draw one. Audience first, we identified our highest volume of customers as women of color. Conflict, and we knew that they weren't seeing a version of themselves in all their beauty on screen or online or in store. They go from the problem to the solution and the story they want to tell. We needed to tell them that not only did we have the products to meet their needs, we had their backs. And then they lay out the content that they did to deliver that story. And what I love about this is that's a wrap-up for their campaign. That could have been on a spreadsheet. This is so much better than a spreadsheet. Every time I see that, I get so jazzed about the possibilities of what branded content can be. All right, and I've been asked to provide some prompts for our discussion groups that are coming up. So I've got 3 prompts. Number 1, if you're from a brand, how are you handling this new world of being in the entertainment business? And if you are from a content studio or you're a creative, how are your clients handling that new challenge of being in the entertainment business? Number 2, what storytelling elements do you wish your brand was including more in its content? And number 3, how do you set your KPIs for branded content, and how completely do they represent your underlying brand goals? Thank you for listening, everybody. I'll see you around the conference. Happy to talk. Grab me anytime.
Thank you, David.